and that this was a matter of utmost urgency. My first thoughts were, when can I go? Percy lived in the roughest part of Nashville, and my truck had been broken into several times in that neighborhood. I remember thinking, if I go now, not only will all the merchandise be stolen, but more than likely the truck also. My very next thought was, I know, tomorrow's Saturday and I only work half a day, so I'll go tomorrow after the truck is unloaded. For anyone who believes that God doesn't know your every thought, let me just say He does. Immediately as I had this last thought, God spoke again, this time even louder and with even more urgency. When God spoke the first time, I would not have believed that He could possibly speak any louder. Guess what? I was wrong. The second time, God said, and I quote, "Tomorrow at noon will be too late." In just those 7 words, God gave me the understanding that Percy would depart this life before 12 noon, Saturday, the next day. My very next thought was, I know, I'll go tonight after the truck is unloaded. This time I heard nothing else. I only knew that I had to go this day and that I had no choice. That unreasonable fear was gone for the time being. The only thing I knew for sure was that I had to go. That workday finally ended. I called Percy's home to see if I could come over. His wife, Cora, answered the phone, and although I had never met her, she acted as though she had known me her whole life. She could not seem to stop saying just how much my coming would mean to Percy. I told her I was on my way. As I drove to see Percy, that unreasonable fear started to return, but I had no thoughts of turning back. I was going. Even if it cost me my life, I no longer cared. God had finally asked me to do something, and I was going. I decided to leave my big Bible in the truck. I carried in my little New Testament inside my coat pocket, very deep inside. I knocked on the front door, wondering all the while, what am I to say? What am I to do? Percy's wife let me inside the front door, where she stopped and whispered, "You just don't know what your coming means to Percy." Then she added, "I've been telling Percy for months that someone from work would come and see him. Every time I'd tell him that, he'd say, 'No, honey, I know they're all busy,' and then he'd hang his head." She also said she knew just how much it hurt him to think that all of his friends, some of which he had worked with for 20 or 30 years, had no time to visit a dying man. You could see and feel the hurt in her eyes and her voice as she told me this. It hurt me, and I hardly even knew the man. Well, time was running out. I knew she didn't know that Percy would be gone come morning. I certainly wouldn't have known how to tell her. She didn't know if I was a Christian or a heathen. She didn't know, and she didn't care. She only knew I cared enough to come. I've never felt as welcome anywhere in my life, before or since. I only knew that that was a good feeling, and I welcomed it. "Percy's back here," she said as she led me to the rear of the house. Upon entering what turned out to be Percy's bedroom, the first thing I noticed was what appeared to be a very, very old man sitting in a rocker. I remember thinking, that must be Percy's grandfather. The man appeared to weigh no more than 75 or 80 pounds. I remember looking around this very small room for Percy. There was no one else in that room. My eyes came finally, for the first time, upon the face of the man in the rocker. It was Percy. At the moment he recognized me, his face lit up like a small child's at Christmas. Such a look of joy on the face of a dying man. I'll never forget it. Never. How could this man have changed so much in only 6 short days? It was almost beyond belief. He appeared to be about 100 years old and about 60 pounds lighter than when I saw him last only 6 days before. We began a general conversation. I sat there the whole time thinking, what will I say? All the while feeling that little New Testament inside my coat pocket. About every 10 minutes or so, great waves of pain would come on Percy. His wife would stand behind him and rub his lower back as hard as she could. It was almost more than I could bear watching. These onslaughts would last a minute or two, and then we would resume our conversation as best we could. Finally, Percy's wife said she needed to go to the kitchen for a few minutes. Percy almost had a fit. What if the pain comes back and you're not here? I didn't know it at the time, but this had been a continual thing for weeks upon weeks upon weeks, and it was easy to see that this woman had to have some relief, even if only for a few minutes. I finally managed to convince Percy that should that happen, I would take her place. Percy agreed, so his wife left the room. Only a few minutes later, that agonizing pain did return, so I did as I promised, and that this was a matter of utmost urgency.